Our whole church staff is what we call co-vocational. We make our primary living outside of church work,
Hmm.
um, even though all church work is full time, right?
Yeah.
And the distinction there for us is not to make a big deal out of the fact that, like, I'm the pastor and I'm also a firefighter. The real crux of the whole heart behind co-vocation is that everyone in the congregation is a minister.
Hmm.
And so we're just like kind of pouring gasoline on the whole priesthood of all believers mindset.
Derrick, thanks for making time to hang out today. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about where you are joining us from.
So I am joining you from a pretty tough place to live. It's called San Diego, California,
Sunny
and
San Diego.
it's it's a beautiful place to live.
I would love to start by hearing about Maker's Church and however much of the story you want to tell us, but who you are today has been a story that is really marked by God's generosity, by
Mm.
providential circumstances, by creative partnerships. And so tell us a little bit of the story of Maker's Church.
Yeah, absolutely. Maker's Church has been around in one way for about 15 years. We started, my wife and I, as a campus of a church that we were part of in LA. We started in San Diego, kind of on accident. We weren't really looking to start a church or a church plant or a church campus. I work full time as a firefighter. My wife is a physician assistant. And a big part of my story is that, in terms of understanding my own calling, was actually not to go into vocational
Mm,
ministry, but to see myself called into the workplace, for me specifically, the fire department, as my mission field. And so that's a longer story of how that all became clear in my life, but I pursued that wholeheartedly. And then later on, this idea of a church began to kind of bubble up inside of us. And so in 2010, we started this campus of a church. And then in 2017, we spun off and we became Maker's Church, really rooted in what we use the language for the way we're kind of modeled is called co-vocational. And I
okay.
know bivocational is kind of a common phrase you typically use for pastors or church planters who the churches can't afford to pay them full time, so they work a side hustle in order to live. That's not, entirely true in all cases, but that's kind of like a stereotype of what bivocational is. And my father-in-law was actually a bivocational pastor who kind of gave me the first kind of awareness of like somebody
Mm,
who's not in full time, well, all ministries full time, but exclusive full time church
yeah.
work. Um, and so the more and more I began to understand the theology of what I now call co-vocation, the ecclesiology, and most importantly, the missiology of what kind of work and workplace and ministry looks like. We kind of threw ourselves fully into that. So what we look like today as a church is our whole church staff is what we call co-vocational. We make our primary living outside of church work,
Mm,
um, even though all church work is full time, right?
yeah.
And more importantly, ministry is full time. And the distinction there for us is not to make a big deal out of the fact that, like, I'm the pastor and I'm also a firefighter. The real crux of the whole heart behind co-vocation is that everyone in the congregation is a minister.
Mm,
And so we're just like kind of pouring gasoline on the whole priesthood of all believers mindset. And so we really, really are trying to help everybody who has come to know Jesus see themselves as part of the team, somebody who's on the
mm,
team to bring about the great commandment and the great commission. And they don't have to leave their day jobs to do it. They
yeah.
don't have to exclusively serve on a team at our church to do it. To simplify it, we just say wherever you live, work, and play, that's your mission field. That's where
Mm,
God has placed you. You have a unique influence to make in that space that no one else, like I don't have any influence in all the other sectors of society other than the ones I'm in, which for me is the fire department and church and my family. But we have people in all sorts of different contexts that get to be light and love in the
Mm,
hands and feet of Jesus in places that no one else might see as a mission field or ministry. So that's like a real core distinctive of us as a church.
mm,
We are so 2017 we spun off, and we, like I say, like we grew up and we moved out of the house. We like stepped into our identity as like a co-vocational church. Um, and then kind of another quick part of the story that would bring you up to today is in 2019, we had always been like a set up tear down church, moving all over the city into different venues that could accommodate us. And we had started from the very beginning always wanting to be multi-generational, multi-ethnic as a church, and that was a big kind of heartbeat of ours. And over time, through like a lot of kind of muscling our way through it, we were like almost barely kind of multi-generational, multi-ethnic. Um, and we also, once we became our own church in 2017, we kind of became untethered from any larger
mm,
church network or history or denomination. And we actually felt really, we just felt like we needed to be rooted in kind of the
mm.
larger, longer tradition of faithfulness in this city. And we really had no idea how to achieve any of that.
Yeah.
Um, and as you mentioned in the early parts of our chat, it's just been God's graciousness after graciousness after graciousness to us as a church. We were looking for a venue, as we always were, looking for a venue, and God just ordained this providential,
Mm,
amazing connection with this historic church in North Park, which is a specific area that I have that our church has. We started in North Park. We were in North Park for most of our existence as a church, but had at times had to go to different neighborhoods just to find venues that could accommodate us. And we knew like there's no venue in North Park that we could go back to. But in God's graciousness, through this real miracle story, he brought our church and North Park Baptist Church into relationship, and over a very short period of time, um, we felt compelled to bring our two churches together into one.
wow.
Through we use marriage really more as the metaphor. I think like in the business world, you have acquisitions and mergers, and this
Yeah.
was like neither one of those. This was two really becoming one,
Mm,
and just this really rich, beautiful story. And the simple way we tell the story is they were a church that was praying for a future, and we were a church that was praying to be rooted in a history. And God
mm.
answered that overnight. He brought us together, and two truly became one. And so we just celebrated 100 years of church, of being a church, even though most of us have only been around for 15 of
Yeah.
of this 100-year history. And so we just feel like we inherited a really, really, really rich history, and we feel really compelled to steward the next 100 years of what God would do on this corner in North Park.
Beautiful. Oh man. For people listening, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We want to talk about this co-vocational thing. Okay, I want to talk about North Park and this 100-year-old
Hmm.
church. So I'll just to ease the minds of listeners, we're going to lean into both of these because I think they're very important plot points in the story of the church right now in Canada, around the world, thinking about creative ways to do ministry into the next chapter of a church's
Hmm.
story. So let's talk about this marriage because how would you talk about like tell me a little bit about North Park Baptist Church, you know, who they were,
Hmm.
what's unique about them and by the way, like when you talked about like inheriting their history, I just my heart's really gripped by that because sometimes we see I'm a church planter for the most part without a building. One of our locations
Hmm.
we did a marriage as well, and there's that
Hmm.
there. But in Vancouver, we're without a permanent space. And sometimes I'll chat with other church planters or pastors, and really it's like we want to inherit a building, and that's not a wrong thing to want. Like it's practical, it makes
Yeah.
sense. But
Hmm.
the possibility of inheriting a history, a spiritual
Hmm.
legacy,
Yeah.
generations of prayer,
Yeah.
this the promises God have made those people, seeds that have been sown. I love that language so much. So tell us a bit more about the church and really just that it sounds like a quick story, but how that marriage came about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once again, it's just I keep coming back to this idea of just like God's graciousness and his providence. And I say that I know I'm talking to mostly pastors, and it's like I don't think God is not trying to be gracious or like providential to you if you haven't like had a building drop into your
Yeah.
lap. So I'm not saying that at all. Um, but like we genuinely weren't for the first time ever, like muscling our way into something. Like
Mm,
we were at this point out of options and open handed and desperate for God to do something that only He could do. I'm an activator by nature. I want to get things done. I will literally kick doors down, and we've done that many times in our history. And at this point, we were um, just out of options. Like we really didn't know what would be next. And so um, I think part of the I'll just tell the story because I think it's a miracle. So the first miracle is my wife and I were together running errands. Right, we have three kids. We both have jobs, multiple jobs. So this random day we're together running errands to drop off an Amazon return. Imagine that, and literally on the corner of the block that we're on is a UPS store, and it's a frequent visit. Right, you're just returning the Amazon stuff. We're together, and I have driven by this church property a million times. It's on the exit to the freeway to my house. I've worked in this neighborhood for a long time, seen it a million times, but never knew what was going on inside the building, never knew the pastor, which is actually rare because in San Diego, we have a really beautiful connection of pastors all over the city. And in fact, we just hosted an amazing lunch yesterday to prepare for a week of prayer and fasting that we do every year.
mm,
Next, around Ash Wednesday that week, and it was we kick the Lent season off, and so we're pretty connected around the city. But I just never knew what was going on in this building, and never wondered, to be honest. And my wife was turning the corner, she was driving, and I just said stop. And the second miracle was that there was a parking spot in front of the church, which it's a busy street. And I just almost out of body experience got out of the car and was just standing in front of the building, no idea why
mm.
I was there. And I saw a little handwritten note on the front door and it said office around the corner. And I like walked around the corner, rang the doorbell. Third miracle is I waited forever for somebody to answer. I mean, all signs were there's no one in this building. And I just waited. And a woman answered the door finally. And I said, like, I really didn't know why I was there. And so I was like, hey, my name's Derrick, a pastor of church. We're actually coming back to North Park. At this point, we were going to go to a venue that we knew wouldn't work, but it was our only option. And so I said, we're going to be down the street. And I just thought it'd be nice to know, like, what's going on
Yeah.
here. And you guys have been around a long time. I'd love to learn from you. Could I just give you my name and I'd love to meet the pastor? And she was very kind and she brought me in and she kind of showed me around a little bit. And it was this cavernous, like 500 seat auditorium, sanctuary. And I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. And I could tell I was overstaying my welcome a little bit because they were in like a staff meeting. And I was like, hey, so great to meet you. I'm going to move on. And I left. And like a couple days later, my one of my best friends forwarded me an email from a guy that had just moved here from Cincinnati. He was part of a huge church in Cincinnati, was still on staff there, but moved to San Diego. And basically, I think he was just saying like, Pastor, go be friends. Like, I don't really want to
Yeah.
hang out with this guy. He's just offloading them onto me. And so I met up with him, and he had just moved to North Park. And we were catching up, talking about life. I said, yeah, we're actually moving back to North Park, but we're trying to figure out how and where. And this guy who had just landed in San Diego about 2 weeks prior, knows nobody in town, says, hey, have you met Pastor Glenn at North Park Baptist Church?
Mm,
And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, how do you know this guy? He said, my wife and I, we always serve a meal at Thanksgiving. We didn't know where to do that. We saw a church across the street. We knocked on the door. We met them. They were serving a meal. We like hung out with a bunch of older people and served a meal on Thanksgiving. And they're really sweet. And I don't know. I just feel like you should meet them. So we have a random guy from Cincinnati who connects me to Pastor Glenn, who I had just been on the doorstep of a week prior. And when Pastor Glenn and I got together, he told me the history of the church, right? So it's been around almost 100 years. It was like one of the largest, most thriving churches it started in the late or the mid 20s. And it really thrived up until the
Mm.
60s, had kind of a hard thing. He had been here for about 30, 25 to 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And the neighborhood had changed out from under them, as you would imagine neighborhoods do.
Yeah.
And the church had stopped reflecting the neighborhood.
Mm.
And so Pastor Glenn had the vision that their church would reflect the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was becoming more and more diverse. And so he hired an African American pastor, Pastor Rob. Pastor Glenn's white. He had a vision for a multi-generational, multi-ethnic church. And so he just said, "Hey, we want to start reflecting the neighborhood." So by the time we met them, I mean, they were this incredibly diverse church. Um, and they were in a sense sunsetting as a church in terms of their numbers were dwindling. Part of it is because the neighborhood had changed again,
Mm.
kind of out from underneath them, and it was becoming more and more gentrified. It became the cool hip neighborhood, and there's all sorts of complexities around that, and how do you navigate the really good and hard and painful things about all of that. But they just knew that they were no longer able to reach the neighborhood the way that it was being changed. And but he was not talking about a merger or none of that.
Yeah.
We had our venue had already changed, so we were meeting outdoors, and he emailed me back after we met. We just kind of told each other our stories and told about our churches, and nothing came from that. He emailed me a couple days later because he knew that we were meeting outdoors and that we were going to do Christmas Eve gathering outdoors. And don't feel bad for us. It's San Diego. It's like 70 degrees all
What I
year.
would give to
Um,
do Christmas Eve outdoors.
but he said he felt like the Lord had placed on his heart that we should do Christmas Eve together. And he
Oh,
literally
beautiful.
was like, it's really like, it just feels like Mary and Joseph with no room at the inn. Like, this is unacceptable. You guys are meeting in the manger. Like, we should do this together. And I was like, how sweet and kind this guy
Yeah.
is. Like, he's so gracious. But like, this is a week before, and I'm like, we can't make that pivot. Like, we're good. Like, we have a great thing going. We're happy for what we're worried about is January, 5th or whatever the next, beginning of the year was, because we were out of a venue. And he said, okay, well, that's fine, but let's get back together. So we got back together, and the Lord had just kept pressing on his heart that there was something happening, and he couldn't name it.
Mm.
Um, and so I really pressed in and challenged him a little bit in that, because they were the kind of church that was like, he would say this too. He'd be like, "Get off my lawn" type church. Like, they never did not rent to church planters. They didn't rent to other places. Um, but I just said, "Hey, I think I don't know what God's doing, but I think He's doing something." We don't gather anyways the last Sunday of the year. We've always taken that off as a kind of Sabbath Sunday, like in the year off, with give our volunteers a break and all that. I said, "Hey, how about we come to church, our team, on that
Mhm.
Sunday, and we'll just worship with you."
Mm.
Um, and we did, and he got really excited about that. And then he said, "Why don't you guys come and you lead worship here next week?"
Oh, wow.
And I was like, call him PG. I was like, "PG, that's like 400 to 500 people who are going to converge on this place,
Yeah.
and like that's not going to go well. Like, you're not going to know what hit you. Like, your church is beautiful, and what you're doing is just so different than what we're doing, and it's just going to be whiplash." And so here I tell you all the details of the story because I think what the big significant uh, difference maker was is our team. We said we're not going to come in and do Maker's Church here on
Yeah.
Sunday, but let's do something together.
Mm.
And our team, Pastor Mark and the rest of our team who leads kind of the worship experience, really brought their teams together and said, let's create some kind of fusion of what you are and of what we are. And I think that was one of the most instrumental steps to say, like, we're not trying to come in and take over and dominate. We're trying to learn from you and have you learn from us. And let's do something uniquely different and new together. And that just brought a bunch of energy and momentum in a
Mm.
direction that we couldn't have dreamed of. And so one thing led to another, and just God was clearly doing something, and we just kept praying and dreaming together. And by Easter of that year, we were merged officially
Wow.
together as entities. Um, and the we said we're dating, and we kind of started talking about this. I think the biggest miracle is North Park Baptist was a congregational led church. That was the way their governance model
Yeah.
worked. Our church doesn't even have members, so
Mm,
it was like, how do we do this together? And what we had agreed on, like how we would shape this, was they had to vote away their own right to vote
wow.
because we were no longer going to be a congregation led church. And it was, I think, with the exception of one person, it was a unanimous vote
Wow.
on their side. And so it just was like, um, total miracle. And then we have tried to help a few other churches navigate this, and it did not go well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in terms of like what worked and what didn't and why, I feel like we really just rode the wave, and we were obedient to what the Spirit of God was doing. And for some reason, we didn't screw it up. Like we didn't,
Mm.
um, you know. So I
Oh, it's
wish there was like
beautiful,
a
man.
recipe. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the story of how it
Well, it's
unfolded.
so inspiring to hear. And hearing the kind of providential ways God moved. How has that changed? I mean, like it's of course it's radically changed. It's two churches are now becoming a kind of a different church on the other side, name whatever. But the actual like heartbeat of the church evolved and changed through something like that. What are some of the changes you've noticed, like the church that you guys were before this marriage
Mm.
and who you are after? What could you describe as been part of what's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. I would say if we just remove COVID from being like one of
Yeah,
the greatest things that changed, because right, 2019 we merged, then COVID hit,
right.
and then that just like blew everything up. But if you remove the all the complexities of COVID, I think the greatest thing that changed is when you inherit a legacy and a history, you begin to care about things you never cared about before. You begin to give um, pay attention to things that were not on your purview. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the multi-generational, multi-ethnic church is you get to see the world and God and each other through different lenses that you just literally don't have.
Mm,
And so in terms of how did like the merge change what we were as Makers Church, I mean, we do and don't do and care about and don't care about all sorts of different things
mm,
than before we ever came together.
wow.
Um, and so I think that yeah, and then the way our teams came together is a lot of their core folks joined our board, our elders, our staff team, and all of that, and they just they brought a whole different dimension to our world and to our understanding of God and of the way the church works.
Mm.
So it's been really rich.
How's it changed you as a pastor? Like, what did this season demand of you? And what did God teach you about how you lead, how you partner with Him, make space for others?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'll give you a real just practical view because we're talking insider baseball, right? There's a lot of pastors listening to this. Um, I've always been a collaborative leader. I've never been like the authoritative leader, the person that says it, I said it, let's go do it. I've always been postured in position like that. Um, but in kind of a funny way, the church governance itself wasn't
Mm,
organized that way. I mean, our bylaws and all the boring like church governance polity stuff was kind of a Frankenstein of what we had inherited over the different iterations of our church. And really, it was, and there's nothing wrong with this model. It just didn't reflect the way we really were as a church. It was very much like pastor led. Um, I kind of had all the power um, in the bylaws. Um, and so when you merge with a congregational led church, that wasn't threatening at all because of the way I'm wired as a leader. It
yeah.
wasn't like, It wasn't hard. I'm very collaborative. I very much so believe that God, the Spirit of God, is alive and active and moving in all the believers. Hence the co-vocation piece, the priesthood of all believers, a huge part of my theology. But our governance model didn't reflect that.
Mm,
And so we're literally currently like right now, we're just like a couple edits away from ratifying a whole new set of bylaws that would really capture the heart of really more of an
mm,
elder-led, stewarded type church. Um, and I would say communal discernment has become, in the last year and a half, probably the greatest formational practice of all of our team individually and
wow.
corporately, as we have been practicing communal discernment together. How does the voice of God make its way into not just a person, but into a community?
Mm,
Um, and so that has been a huge way that I have changed as a leader. And I see the second way is I'm an activator by nature. I just like I'm a shoot, ready, aim kind of guy. Like I just will learn from my mistakes. I don't deliberate. I just act, and I usually get it wrong, and then I learn from my mistakes and all that. I have been kind of reformed in a way on that front where it's still in my nature, but I'm much slower and methodical with a team of
mm,
people who help make decisions together that aren't going to be whiplash for everybody else around me.
mm.
And I would say I think the merge was really what contributed to that shift in me as a
Mm.
leader.
Do you think that some of those shifts, like I'm reflecting my own leadership journey and even governance shifts, like we're asking questions at year 5 of our church story about what governance will reflect the age and stage of our church. Do you
Hmm.
think that, well, some of that is just maturing and growing up, that some of it reflects the unique needs of a church at different stages in the journey? Like in that entrepreneurial stage, it's like quick and nimble and
Hmm.
responding to opportunities. And often like the vision and the heartbeat lives in a couple or an individual or a small group of people. But then over time, it's almost like hearing your story, like you're growing up or you're changing as a leader also reflects the age and stage of your church. Now, it's unique that you merged with 100-year-old church, but think
Mm.
about church like your church is a teenager and it's maturing and it's
Hmm.
living beyond just the vision of the founding group, but needing to actually permeate. And, you know, everyone has different allergic reactions to bureaucracy and process and policy.
Hmm.
But when it's healthy and it's good, it reflects the charism of the church, the gifting and the call, and also the age and stage of the church. Any reflections on that as you think about how God's shifted you as a leader in this like co-journey with the journey of the church?
Yeah, man, I love that insight and question. Um, yes, and right. I do think it is like, I turned 40 a few years ago. I'll be 43 in December. That's one of those moments, at least I took pretty seriously, like, oh man, like I'm moving into a different era of my life.
Mm,
I got very I did a sabbatical about a year and a half ago from church work, not the fire department, which was like stopping and resting and doing any of that was like totally out of the norm for me. So I was very introspective and more than normal, and really got at a lot of the things you just talked about, like just the different stage and age of our lives and what does that look like and how do we change and grow. But I would say that I really do think God used the merger. I don't know that I would have matured in
mm,
the way I should have or will continue to mature without this kind of external opportunity to create internal change.
mm,
Um, and I think, and to your point of like just the life stage of a church, right? I think the biggest clarifying event for me was this much more broad, robust, like, oh, we have 100 years of history and we need to steward 100-year future if
yeah.
Jesus doesn't come back before then, right? So it's like 100 years, like I'm not going to be around. We clearly cannot build this off of just my wiring or my gifting or any one of our team's wiring or giftings. It is a what is God calling this local church to be? Remember, part of our history now is like these multiple neighborhood shifts that have happened
Yeah.
over 100 years, right? It's like we don't even know what that could be in 10, 15, 20 years. There's a massive shift happening right now. Housing has changed in San Diego. In fact, part of our story is we're in the middle of this giant renovation. The church was never able to figure out how to keep this old deferred maintenance building operating. So it's in
Yeah.
pretty massive disrepair. But one thing the church had done over all those years was they purchased houses across the street, and we owned 9 houses.
Mm.
We were the single largest landowner in North Park. Um, and we knew we had to renovate the church. Like the ceilings literally falling in, and it just was unsafe. And it's a multi-million dollar project that we had no means to do. Funny story: we started a menial capital campaign, um, and the commitment Sunday was the first Sunday of the COVID shutdown.
Oh my goodness.
So literally the day that people were coming with their envelopes to pledge a gift, to like
Oh,
start chipping
devastating.
away at some of this deferred maintenance, it was that Sunday. We'd never gathered. Um,
Mm.
and so we had to we pivoted, right? What are we doing? So when we merged, we had said, we'll never sell the land, right? Like that was just like, I think even codified into the bylaws, right? It just was like, we just won't ever sell the land or whatever. But a few years later, the history changed, right? And the
Yeah.
neighborhood changed and city policies changed. And they are allowing more density into the neighborhoods because of a housing crisis in San Diego and the cost of living being so high. So the city changed their zoning, which changed the property values, which gave us a different decision to make. And so we were able to sell the homes and use the sell proceeds of the homes to renovate the church building, which is why we're in this kind of makeshift
Mm.
space that we're sitting in. And so we're under renovation right now. It's been like a 5 year journey. But I say all that to paint the picture of like this neighborhood's rapidly changing. It's becoming
Mm.
more and more dense. It went from like a neighborhood community with a really cool kind of artsy downtown area, actually much like the neighborhood you live in, Jason. Um, and now it's all becoming mid rises. They're going
Mm.
about 7 stories, and it's going to, before we know it, it's going to look a lot like Little Italy, Bankers Hill, parts surrounding downtown around San Diego. That's going to bring a tremendous change to the neighborhood. And the church that is going to be relevant on this corner in 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 years is going to be a church that has totally different needs
Mm.
than the giftings and vision that God has given Derrick Miller or anybody else on our team. And so what that's done is it's allowed us to kind of pull back and go, okay, God, not just how do we build into the DNA of our church a DNA that is listening and being obedient to what the Spirit of God is doing at
Yeah.
this time, at this place in history. And how do we do that now? And how do we set up a future for our church where
Mm.
those core values will last beyond any one person's talent or vision or charisma or just like muscling our way into something? And so that's
Yeah.
been a huge shift for
Mm.
us and our team.
I love hearing that story, man. I think the first time we ever met, correct me if I'm wrong, um, it's in an elevator and you are not wearing your clerical robes. You're wearing a different uniform. You are dressed like a fireman because you are one. And that's how I met you. And and that's not a thing you do on the side. That's a core part of your vocation. I think that's why you use
Mhm.
the word co-vocation. These are two callings that are in harmony, not in conflict with each other. But I
Mm.
want to talk about this because there's practical questions that I've got, like how do you manage time? I want to know, I'm curious about, is this just you? It sounds like this is other people on your staff are also co-vocational. Um, that's there's obviously moments of wrestling with the tensions of that. So just bring us
Mhm.
into it from any angle you want. But I think that I think this is a very powerful picture. And I think what's also helpful is not that if it was a small church, it would make more sense, but this isn't, we're not talking about a church of like 20 people that, doesn't have a lot of needs. I mean, this could demand your full time, but yet you've made a decision to operate this way. So just bring us
Mhm.
into the life of that tension, how you find harmony with that, and how that's actually affecting your own life and spirituality and calling in San Diego, but also others in your church who are on a similar journey?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a huge part of our DNA. And I think what's been really cool is like this was a very eventually clear calling on my life. It was not clear for a long time. It was very confusing and really challenging
Mm,
to feel like I was abandoning a ministry calling for like a workplace calling.
yeah.
And that's a whole part of my story we won't get into. But when I got clarity on this idea that the workplace, whatever it might be, um, doesn't compete with our ministry calling, but complements it.
Mm,
Everything came into view for me, and it was particularly me studying Paul's model of being a tent maker. And Paul never quit his day job. It's
mm,
all that Paul did, and all of the New Testament, all the churches he started, and all the traveling he did, he carried with him a trade. He built tents until the day he died. He was a tent maker, and he says over and over that it gave him credibility. It gave him access to people that he wouldn't have had as a Pharisee or as a church starter. He had access into all these places that he never would have. And so I think for me, when that became clear, like I said earlier, like I just went full force into. I feel called into the fire department on mission for Jesus. That is going to be my mission field. At some point in my life around then, I was more arrogant and ignorant. I don't know which one was more, louder than the other, but I just thought like church work is for a certain particular type of person that isn't really making a big difference in the kingdom. That's like kind of the way that I thought about it. And I was like, I'll go show you.
mm,
Um, and obviously now I have this huge, robust understanding of the beautiful importance of not these bifurcated. It's why we don't use bivocational. They're bifurcated. They're separate. We use co. It means they're with. They're complementary.
mm,
They
mhm.
are together. Um, and doing church work or being a pastor of a church that came back into my story much later. Um, but it was so ingrained in me that the workplace was my primary calling. That when we began building a church, that conviction and that calling on my life, I think attracted other people who were really compelled by that idea. Now it attracted other people who were, skeptical of, church finances and had church hurt and all these other like complicated, complex things we had to navigate that weren't all good and beautiful or true. Um, but we ended up getting this kind of outpost of people who were more and more convinced that they're calling to be a stay-at-home mom or a firefighter or an artist or one of our pastors is a high school principal,
Mm,
um, to begin to see their work as mission field, as the
yeah.
place where God has placed them to be the hands and feet and might and love of Jesus. And so that has just become like just a core thing of who we are. So today, our entire team, we started, everybody was volunteers, nobody got paid a dime. Um, there was absolutely a season where we like overworked volunteers. You know what I mean? Like we made all the mistakes, right? Um, but what we have now, I think, is this really beautiful. I wouldn't call it balance because there's nothing
Mm,
balanced about like what we're doing. Um, but we have a team of people who make their primary living outside of church work. Our staff team, many of them are paid by the church, not nearly enough to live in San Diego. Um, but in terms of like time management, how does it work? How do you do that? We have our pastors are salary. They're mostly we just get a housing stipend that would be in most cases nominal. But we're not dependent on the church
yeah.
to make ends meet. And then the rest of our staff is part time, so they have a certain amount allotment of hours they work each week, depending on whatever their discipline or area of ministry is. And we have a deeply robust core of passionate volunteer leaders, um, some that are just interested with just as much as or more as any staff person,
Mm,
and a lot of that comes down to personal conviction for some of these folks. We have several key leaders that lead vibrant, robust ministries of our church who we've offered to pay, and they're just like, we're good. We
Wow.
just want to we just want to serve at this level in our gifting, and we don't want to cross that line of like having to do something versus getting to do something. And
Mm,
it's created this really interesting and unique culture of our church. And so there's just a lot of stuff that we might care about, but we just don't do because,
yeah.
it's like there's just not somebody here, 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week, depending on how healthy your church culture is, right? Um, but I would say like what you will see is we have a thriving campus in the heart of the urban core of San Diego. We have all the facilities needs that you would ever imagine. We're very hospitable with our space, so we serve a bunch of other different kind of communities and ministries that are doing things. We're partnering with Park Hill Church, one of our close friends, on running Alpha here, on Tuesday nights, and so we have a staff that supports that. So it's not like we're just not around doing
Right.
church things. Um, but everyone has access into a sphere of society that no one church could have.
Yeah.
And so unless you realize that we are the church, and when we leave this place, the sending post on Sundays, it's a sending place that sends us out into the mission field. In fact, um, as I was preparing to be on this podcast, I looked back and scrolled through and saw, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but from Regent's College,
Oh,
on
from
workplace theology.
Paul Stevens. Oh, the
Dude,
legendary Paul Stevens. What a gem.
I
I mean,
literally,
this is his passion. Like
bro,
he's the man.
I listened to that podcast and I felt like the dude on Dumb and Dumber that was like, "You had two pairs of gloves the whole time." I'm like, "Where's this guy been all my life?" Like I had never heard of him before, and I just listened to that, feeling so inspired.
Yeah.
I mean, he put such eloquent and simple language to what we're trying to do and convince our people of as a church,
Mm,
and so that's just the way that we're made up. And then in terms of like the time constraints, how do we do all that? I mean, that's why you met me in an elevator with turnouts on.
yeah.
It's like the event that you were at, I would have loved to be there for all 3 days of the event. And I couldn't be, but I knew you were in town. And so I just showed up for the few minutes I could and gave some hugs and said hi's. And my heart was like, man, I want to do that. I want to be in that thing. I want to do the cohort. But I couldn't. My life doesn't afford me that option in this season of my life with 3 kids and a wife and a church and a job. So we just do what we can. And then
Mhm.
there's so much grace in what you can do is enough, you
Yeah.
know? And that's really rampant in our culture as a church.
Mm. I'm really thankful. Like, if I, my feeling of this conversation, like, I want to have this conversation with you. I love so much of your story, but I really wanted to tell a story of a co-vocational pastor, and more than that, a church that has imagination for this, because sometimes we can't imagine what's possible until we've heard it.
Mm,
And, there's lots of reasons why churches might consider this path forward. It might be a reality of our times. Like, we live in a part of the world where you can afford, in theory, to have a building and a space, but we've got brothers and sisters leading church around the world where it's like a salary, a full time, like, that's not even in
hmm
the cards.
Yeah.
Uh, Also, there's a missional aspect to this where maybe it's not because of a financial constraint, but that might be a legitimate reason. But this is about a missional strategy. I also
hmm
imagine that I was just the last episode of the podcast we dropped before recording this was Filipino congregation in central Canada,
mm,
who most of their sites are pastored by non-paid staff. And
mm,
then they have some full-time staff, and they've
yeah.
negotiated, okay, why some, and it's just that there has to be imagination for other ways to do it.
Mm,
And if someone's listening like me, it like, there's like little like insecurities and defensiveness. Like, I'm a full-time pastor. I get paid to do
mm,
this. And like,
yeah.
and I think those are good things to wrestle with. And I know you, and I know that there's not a double-edged sword or a subtext being like there shouldn't be. It's just there just
Mm,
has to be a lot of different ways that we go at this, and we
100%.
need to have imagination. So I'm just really thankful for it. And one of the things I'm allowed to say this, jealous of,
Mm,
is that there's no way that people in your church would doubt that their work matters.
mm,
And that's the thing I find myself constantly wanting to preach. Like,
mm,
and that's what Paul was getting at. It's like your work, your life in your home, on your street. This is to someone who's just attending the church, a part of the church. Your life
mm,
is a ministry. There aren't pastors and then the rest of Christians. And I
mm-hmm.
think this is an essential rediscovery for the church in America, in Canada, is you
Amen.
call it the priesthood of all believers. It's like your life and work matters to God. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just the money you earn and then tithe on. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
just the moments of evangelism, though that's important. In the most robust sense, you are the aroma of Christ spread into the
Mm,
city. And most I'm just so thankful for the tensions you must manage, the complexity of it all. But it creates like a whole different trajectory of imagination in my mind for what's possible in my teams, my people,
mm-hmm.
and other churches. And so I mean, if there's anything else you want to add, any more caveats or insights, we're open to it. But mostly, I'm just thankful that you would tell the story
Yeah.
for our imaginations to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would just close with this, and I think you touched on it, is like um it's a way. I think God is going to use the church in the future and is using the church now. It's a maybe a new way, or it's going to become a more robust strategy that God
Yeah,
can use in the future, but not the only way. And
yeah,
so, I've gained a huge respect now being a pastor for 15 years. I could easily only do this and still not have enough time in my day to do it. Right. And
mm,
so I have a huge respect and high regard for people who are in full time vocational ministry and church work. And it's to those pastors that I would say, like yourself, don't assume that that model is the only model that will work in your church.
mm,
Meaning, you don't have to go get a day job to convince somebody else in your church that their work matters, that their
mm,
life should be whole and integrated, right? You don't have to change what you do to be able to breathe wind and to help lead people into this robust understanding of what it means to be the church. This body part, this integrated body that everyone plays their part, right? As the scriptures point us to, it's like it's not one size fits all. There's
yeah,
not one model that works, and so I think it's easy to just assume, like, even in your staffing decisions, right? Like, just flip the script, right? Don't assume that because this high talented, high caliber leader that you have in your church won't quit their day job, that they can't be an integral
yeah.
leader and staff member even at your church. Staff has all this weird language. So I just tell the quick story of one of our guys. He leads all of our communities. He's a younger guy. He's wise beyond his years. He has a successful company. And he is like, everyone would want to hire this guy to be on their church team, to be like, I'd hire him to be a pastor tomorrow. And I've tried. And he's so mature in his faith. He has such a clear sense of calling on his life that he's like, no thanks. But I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing out here in the workplace. And I'm going to use the capacity that I have to lead other leaders to move the mission forward for the church. But stop asking me to be on your team. In
Mm,
terms of, he's on our team.
yeah,
He's fully on our team. Stop pretending like I need to be on the paid team to be on the team.
yeah,
And so there's this clumsy but beautiful model of, we treat him like a staff person, but we don't hold staff expectations over him. Meaning, you're invited to all the staff meetings, you're invited to all the things, you bless the room when you're in it, and when you're not there, we're not paying you to be here, so we'll send you the notes.
yeah,
And he's this wildly successful leader in our church context. And I think, like, any church could have multiple leaders like that
yeah.
who don't necessarily need to fit the mold or the model of what you think is the only way forward
Hmm.
as a church. And I think, as pastors, our job is to equip and deploy, equip and deploy, equip and deploy,
Yeah.
and be a sending base, so that we can go be the church in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. It is the only way that the church, you can't get everyone into your doors. You don't even have room for it. You don't even have a building
Mm,
for it, right? So if we become a sending place, man, the church just goes rampant all over, and it's this yeast that's working its way through the city. The kingdom of God is coming, and it's like people don't even know what to do with it.
wow.
And it's just this beautiful thing. And I'll also end with like, and it's not, the strategy isn't go get all those people to come to our church.
Mm,
It's some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them they need to be in a church, but there's churches all over the city we might be able to partner with. So have a bigger view
mm,
of what God is doing and how God is using the church, not just our church. And there's a lot of people who just our flavor of church that our people reach isn't going to be the right size fits all for them. And so we open handedly say, you should meet my friend over here at this church or that church. You should be in church, but it doesn't have to be this church. Um, and so it just, I mean, and story for another day, but I could just tell you story after story after story after story. People who have come to know Jesus through their friend at work, around the water cooler or the lunch break or the, um, fire engine or whatever it might be. And so it is a cool vision um, to see of the church becoming more and more of a sending and equipping place
mm.
than just a gathering place. Come and be a part of our thing. So I'm inspired by it.
I love it, dude. You and I've been in the room together a few times now, shared some meals together, and a couple of things that I notice about you. One is you're a very present person for someone who's got a lot on the go, kids
Mm,
that are growing up, two full-time jobs, or however you put it.
hmm
Um, and interests and passions. Like there's things that you find fun, and I know you dirt bike and all sorts of things. I've just always found you to be really present, really curious, and I've always been really inspired and challenged in the most healthy way by your love for that church, the way you talk about
mm,
the churches of San Diego. I've
mm,
been inspired by the way you do friendship. I know that there's
mm,
like long-term friendships that are
hmm
behind the scenes. I bet if somebody asked, "How do you do all these things?" You'd be like, "Well, you'd have to understand the relational life I live
Yeah,
because it's coming out of trust and community." And I feel really convicted and challenged to think about how to empower more people and into participation in the life of our church organized and the church scattered. And so I
yeah.
just thank you so much for the time. This has been such a gift. I can't wait to the next time we get to hang out around a table, and you've been a blessing to me today and to everyone listening.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. And man, I feel the same way. I'm just so inspired by what you're doing up in Vancouver and through the pastorate, and even meeting some of the Canadian pastor friends of yours and different contexts we've been in, and hearing the story of what God is doing. It just gives me even a greater appreciation for His kingdom that is here and still coming,
Mm.
and to see His work being done through so many people like yourself, man. So thankful.